So I'm very honored to be here today with Sharon Salzberg. She's a very prolific writer of many books on mindfulness. She has a long history of a relationship with mindfulness and meditation going back into her teenage years. And I have always thought that there's so much that our field could learn from mindfulness. And when I first started as a graduate student, I wondered, what does it mean to be in the room with our clients and our patients and not be mindful? What does that mean? And how can mindfulness help to inform our presence and our healing capacity with the people that we work with? So Sharon will be available in the bookstore after our session at 12:30. 12 o'clock to sign her new book, which is called Mindfulness at Work.
Real Happiness at Work.
Real Happiness at Work. And I hope you'll come by and have a chat with her there as well. So I thought it would be good to begin by asking you, Sharon, and thank you so much for being here with all of our psychological colleagues today. What is mindfulness?
Woohoo! Hi, well, I'm really honored and happy to be here. Thank you so much. What is mindfulness? Wow, so I have been practicing, it's true. I've been practicing meditation, mindfulness meditation, since January of 1971. So that's a good long time. And I did start when I was very, 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 very young. I will say that. And someone just said to me the other day something like, you were talking about mindfulness when nobody knew what it meant. And I said, well, people have always known what it meant. It's just that it wasn't that interesting to a lot of people. So we would say mindfulness is a quality of awareness where our attention is not so distorted by bias. Old fears, projection into the future, maybe something uncomfortable is happening emotionally or physically, and right away we start thinking, what's it going to feel like tomorrow? What's it going to feel like next year? So by relinquishing the hold of some of these add-ons, the belief is that we have a better chance for a cleaner, clearer experience of what's actually happening.
So with a lot of our clients, I think the major problem is this notion of rumination, that we're either lost in the past or we're catastrophizing about the future. Would you say that mindfulness is an antidote to that?
Almost by definition. Well, mindfulness, I don't know about the word antidote, it's another option, because the rumination will happen, it is believed, and yet we don't have to be so entangled in it. So we call mindfulness a relational quality. It's not about what's happening, it's about how we're relating to what's happening. So, people have all kinds of ideas, and people say to me often, if I'm in some situation where I'm, introducing myself, and then, interestingly enough, the question we always ask is, what do you do, right? Not what brings you joy or what's your favorite color, but what do you do? So I say, I teach meditation. And very often people will say, oh, I tried that once, I failed at it. And then they'll describe what they thought should have happened. I should have been able to stop all thinking. I should have had a perfectly blank mind. I should have been able to keep anxiety from arising. I should have kept sleepiness at bay. And we say meditation or mindfulness is not about what's happening. It's about how we are relating to what's happening. How much presence, how much balance, how much kindness, how much spaciousness are we bringing forth in relationship to what's happening, all of which is to say the same old rumination may happen, but with mindfulness, we neither dive into it nor do we hate it and fear it and try to push it away. So it's a more balanced relationship.
So do you think that we create a different awareness or relationship with our list of shoulds?
Oh, yeah. I think we can create a different relationship with everything, with pleasant, beautiful, wonderful experience, some of which we are so distracted we hardly even take in, some of which we immediately get afraid, how am I going to keep it, how am I going to make it stronger, and some of which we don't take in because we don't feel we deserve it or whatever, and we're almost apologetic about it, and we create a different relationship with pain, painful emotion, painful feeling, painful whatever, so we're not so ashamed and we're not so angry, we're not so afraid. We can have more compassion for ourselves and for others. And we even create a different relationship with neutral experience, the ordinary, repetitive, routine, kind of boring stuff that makes up a lot of our day when we tend to numb out. And most of us are not awfully trained to subtlety, and we count on intensity to feel alive. And so mindfulness is a way to actually connect to those in-between places.
So do you think in a way we get addicted to our anxiety and our depression because it's a heightened affect, and this is a way of sort of working with that?
I don't know, would you call depression a heightened affect?
Well, it's heightened this way or that way.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I do. I mean, it's an interesting proposition, that there's an addictive quality to these states because they do define aliveness for us in many cases.
So it's a way we can learn to sort of tamp that down. Ram Dass, who wrote Be Here Now, is anybody old enough to remember Be Here Now? So Ram Dass, thank you. Ram Dass has this thing that I just totally love, and he says whatever's coming at him, he just says, interesting. And I think that defines equanimity. That's what that word means. So is that also applicable here, where instead of defining in a dualistic way, this is good for me or this is bad for me, that we're simply noticing what is in front of us and creating a different relationship with that, a more friendly attitude?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because, of course, equanimity is a somewhat strange word. I met Ram Dass at my very first retreat in January of 1971 in India. We were both students of this teacher, S.N. Goenka, and Goenka used to go around all the time saying, be equanimous, be equanimous, be equanimous. And we used to whisper to one another, is that a word? Like, do you ever hear anybody say that? What does that mean? And even equanimity, we can think it means indifference or apathy or coldness or a kind of withdrawal, and it doesn't. It really means balance. It's like perspective.
Yes.
If I were working with a student, if you were working with a client, I imagine there's a kind of equanimity that implies patience, like things don't happen right away, even though we want them to, admitting how much we don't know as we watch things unfold, allowing for change, and a kind of balance in recognizing that, there are ups and downs, there are changes that happen, they're kind of inevitable. The way I put it this way, these days is, I don't think anything in life is a straight shot. It's like we go forward, we fall down, we have to pick ourselves up or let someone help us up, we go forward again. We have huge aspiration, we forget it. We have to be reminded or remember, we go forward. We make a mistake, we have to begin again. Maybe we need to make amends, maybe we need to make some changes and learn some things, but endless recrimination is not that useful. We have to go forward at some point. We have to begin again. We need equanimity for that.
And I think the meditation practice itself, where you find yourself lost and label it whatever and then come back, that I think is training our whole organism to begin again and to give ourselves permission to begin again, yeah?
Yeah, I think that in some ways is the most important part of the meditation, and it sounds so unheroic. Like if, we'll do a little practice here together, and if any of you maybe had not practiced before and you did the few minutes here together, and then you go out and you run into a friend and they said, how was it? And you said, I felt a few breaths, my mind wandered and I brought it back. It would be like, very interesting, like, wow, that's really radical. But it is radical. It is very hard to let go and begin again, isn't it? In any realm of life, any endeavor. But that's like clear resilience to be able to start over, to have that sense of renewal, and go forward.
And I also think it shows us what we're doing in our minds. Like, are we kind to ourselves? Would we talk to our children the way we talk to ourselves in our mind? And I would love if you would tell the story of what happened when you first started sitting as a teenager, when you did go to India.
Yeah. I went to India as part of an independent study program from the university I was going to, so it was kind of like my junior year abroad, and you could create a project really about anything, and if they liked it, you could go away for a year, theoretically for a year. I went to college in Buffalo, New York. Is anybody from Buffalo? My joke is usually, being Buffalo, New York, many people went and not that many people came back, which was true. But I created a project. I mean, it was a tremendous blessing for me to be at that university. I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they said, okay. That was my junior year. So I went with my student loans and my Regent Scholarship, and I ended up getting 2 years of independent study credit because I stayed a little longer than a year. And I would say I was a very fractured, unhappy person. I had a very traumatic childhood, a lot of disruption, a lot of loss, and somehow I had this instinct that if I could learn how to meditate, I would be happier. So it was a very personal journey, and I wasn't really interested in philosophical implications. I wasn't interested in comparative religion. I wasn't interested in assuming a new identity or rejecting anything else, becoming a Buddhist or not being something else. It wasn't that way at all. I wanted to know if there were some really practical tools that I could use that would help me. And I went on sheer instinct and finally found in India what I was looking for in the context of this intensive 10-day retreat. So the very first meditation instruction I got, which is what we're going to do here together, was sort of the foundational exercise from many traditions, which was sit and feel your breath. And first of all, I was horribly disappointed. I thought, feel my breath? I came all the way to India. Where's the magical, esoteric, fantastic technique that's going to wipe out all my suffering and make me a totally happy person? I thought, feel my breath. I could have stayed in Buffalo to feel my breath. And then I thought, how hard is this going to be? And then I was like, whoa, this is not so easy. I had thought, okay, what'll it be, like 800 breaths or 900 breaths before my mind starts to wander? And to my astonishment, it was like one, or maybe two, maybe half a breath, and I'd be gone. And I'd be way gone. And I was so fiercely judgmental of that. And I heard over and over and over again the instruction, which I didn't believe for a moment, which was, don't worry about how much your attention wanders. The whole methodology of that particular style of practice is in the letting go and beginning again, and letting go and beginning again. And if you have to do that 90 billion times in a session, that's okay, but I didn't believe it. So I was just beside myself with judgment. And the line you were looking for is when I used to sit there and think, bad meditator, but there was one point in which I thought, if my mind wanders one more time, I'm just going to bang my head against the wall. And very fortunately for me, the lunch bell rang just then. That was the end of that session. But I began to trust more what I was hearing. I began to experience it more, just the kind of brightness, the relief of being able to let go. I could hear the judgment and realize I don't need to go there. Even though it's arising, I can have a much more forgiving space toward myself and be beginning again. And then, of course, I began to see the results.
So it seems like we can do two things at one time. That's what mindfulness and meditation practice helps train our mind to be able to do, to be able to see the rumination, to see the self-judgment, to see the judgment of others, and yet have that not be the singular and unitary place in which we are, that we can watch that while we are actually in the present moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we watch it in a certain way, which is one of the things I think that's often missing in the current conversation about mindfulness, which is mostly centered on one of the many benefits that comes from mindfulness, and it's a good one. You know, mostly people describe mindfulness as the way to really inhabit your life, not to be endlessly multitasking. Linda Stone, who's a writer, coined it continuous partial attention, saying that we are normally just paying continuous partial attention. We're very fragmented. We're all over the place. And we live in a multitasking universe. And so if we drink the cup of tea while we're checking our email, while we're on the conference call, while we have the TV on mute, it's not a very satisfying cup of tea, right? And usually we don't look at the degree of our awareness as playing any role at all in our lack of fulfillment. We blame the tea, right? I got really inferior tea. Why do I use tea bags anyway? I need loose tea. I need a tea strainer. I need to boil the water differently. And maybe we do that and we drink the tea and it's still not very fulfilling because we drank it in the same distracted way as before. I saw myself quoted on Twitter, actually, which said something like, sometimes just drink the cup of tea, Sharon Salzberg. And I thought, that makes absolutely no sense out of context. Like, that's not really a nugget of wisdom. But anyway, it is true. If we are more mindful drinking the cup of tea, it will be much more fulfilling. And that's mostly what's being talked about. Classically, the main benefit of mindfulness is said to be insight. It's understanding. It's not just the cup of tea being better, which is good. I mean, it'd be better if we really lived our lives, for sure. But it's the understanding, it's the insight, which is the main point, which comes from the equanimity. You know, it's not just knowing there's something going on, it's knowing without immediately reacting and jumping in so that we have space to look more deeply.
So is that what insight is?
Yeah, that's what insight is.
What is insight?
Insight. In the context of mindfulness, let's say you are sitting, feeling the breath, and as that technique expands, because it doesn't just stay there, the direction would be if something comes up that's very predominant, not like a little dwippy thing, but really predominant, that becomes your new object of meditation. So let's say it's a wave of anger. At that point, we want to take an interest in the anger rather than just quickly trying to come back to the breath. Not so much why is it here or what am I going to do about it, but what is this feeling? So first, what do I feel in the body? You know, what is the manifestation in terms of sensation? And then it's like we watch the anger movie. What's within the anger? Oh, look at that. I see sadness. I see fear. I see hopelessness. And it's an alive system, right? We see this constellation of different feelings that are making up this sense of anger. And because of that, we also see the truth of change. This feeling which I was so identified with, I'm such an angry person and I always will be. This feeling that felt so solid, unyielding, inflexible, oppressive, overwhelming. Look at that, it's kind of porous. Within itself, it's changing, it's moving, it's shifting. So taking another example of that with physical pain, a friend of mine who had very, very severe chronic pain condition said, I found this space within the pain, right? So because everything is believed to share that nature of essential change, we can use anything as a vehicle for more deeply having insight like that. And that's another reason why we say in mindfulness it doesn't matter what you're watching, because everything can reveal something very fundamental about life. So of course, if I left here and someone said to me, would you rather, or maybe even worse, when I was on my way in here, you know, would you rather deeply see the nature of change looking at bliss or looking at knee pain? I'd say bliss, you know. But since no one offers us a menu, if it happens to be knee pain, that's still a useful vehicle. It's still good.
And I've heard people who've been exposed to mindfulness practice with chronic pain sufferers, that they say the pain didn't go away, but their relationship to the pain has changed.
Yeah. Because you look at the superimpositions. I'm really curious how this works in a therapeutic context, but there is the experience, and then there's everything we are adding onto it. This is the only thing I'll ever feel. This is going to be even worse tomorrow. I'm the only person in the universe who ever feels this, so the isolation. I should have been able to stop this. This is totally my fault. I should have been in control of everything, whatever it is that we're just kind of piling on. That's what we can relinquish.
And as you talk about the movie, being able to watch the movie, that was my experience in meditation practice, was that all of a sudden I could just watch the movie. I didn't know the movie before. I was at the effect of the movie, but getting to know that more and more, so the more you sit, the more you know your own movie. When it pops up, you're not so shocked or taken aback. You say, oh, I know that scene. Mm-hmm. And so you create a different relationship with sort of each stage along that way. Yeah. So why do you think that mindfulness has become so trendy, and why are there so many people in this room? What does mindfulness have to do with psychotherapy?
Oh, you tell me.
What would you think?
Well, I mean, psychotherapy in our culture, in our time, has been the pioneering effort to, to understand life, to understand ourselves in a different way. And so it has been the cutting edge and the vehicle for people, and which is tremendous, And so it's like science, scientists tell me all the time, science is mostly about recognizing what we don't know. It's a continual exploration rather than having a kind of certainty. And every time I write a book or something that quotes a study, I always ask a scientist to look at it, and because the editors are always like, gung-ho, like, 2 minutes of meditation has been proven to solve all your problems. And the scientists are always like, well, let's step back here, and, this study seems to indicate that most probably, it's kind of likely, but without that holding on and that certainty. And I think psychotherapy is a science in that way, and that there's that continual exploration.
So speaking of science, one thing that really struck me when I was first introduced to this whole field was the idea of loving kindness. Like, to me, that sounded very pie in the sky, and I can't imagine talking to a client about manifesting or cultivating their capacity for loving kindness. Can you translate that for us?
Wouldn't that be nice, then? I don't know. Somebody showed me a little film of psychiatrists in Seattle working with veterans using loving kindness, and it was sort of like listening to it, it was kind of a mixture of mindfulness practice and loving kindness practice, which is its own method, which I'll talk about in a second, its own method of meditation. So there was one, it was like a 6-week program or something, and you could watch little snippets of the veterans through that time. So in the beginning, there was one Vietnam-era veteran, very tough kind of guy, and he said, "What am I supposed to tell my friends? I'm doing some kind of loving kindness therapy?" Which was very funny. But by the end, he was like really on board. It was very nice. Loving kindness is its own stream of meditation practice. It's very connected to mindfulness, but it's also different. And it really is about, unlike popular belief, it's not about getting all sentimental and gooey and weird and trying to force a feeling that you don't really have. I call it a stretch. Mindfulness is really designed to bring us as close as possible to our actual experience in a different way. Whereas loving kindness is like a stretch. You realize, I have a certain habituated way of paying attention. Let me experiment and look at myself from a different angle. Or, here's this person I see all the time because I work in the dry cleaners or grocery store, and my habit is to look right through them, to objectify them, to consider them almost like a piece of furniture. What would it be like to look at them, right? To take in their being, to recognize this is a person with feelings who wants to be happy just like I do. If in looking at ourselves we pretty well only remember the mistakes we made and what we did wrong and what we regret, we stretch. and say, anything else happen today? Like, any good within me? So it is intentional in that way, but it's not coercive. It's not saying everything was perfect and I am perfect. And we admit the other side, but usually the other side is where we pretty exclusively dwell. And so what happens if we broaden our perspective? It's like that.
One thing that really struck me when I learned about it was this idea that, of course, we're going to be focused on the things that are harmful or dangerous, that we should, or we would all be dead. So we have a natural tendency to focus on the negative in order to protect ourselves. So in a way, this is just sort of extending that outward, that yes, that's true, but let me look at what's also positive or good or what's informed my day in a loving way.
Yeah.
And it's actually more intelligent, more emotionally intelligent, because we're not just focusing on the awareness or not wanting to get into fight or flight.
Right.
And this, I think, helps that, and that will help our clients work through those things. So there's a whole new field now coming to the fore of self-compassion. Can you talk about that and how that relates?
Self-compassion, and Kristin Neff and later Chris Germer took the original loving kindness teachings and extrapolated this idea of self-compassion from them, and I think in a really brilliant way. And unlike self-esteem, which of course is a good thing, which may be based on looking at good qualities rather than only flaws, for example, or attainments or whatever. Self-compassion comes into play when we have messed up, when we have made a mistake, when things are not feeling that great. How are we with ourselves? How do we speak to ourselves? Are we adding a sense of isolation and blame and shame to what is already a painful and difficult situation? Or I think the three components of self-compassion are, first of all, mindfulness. We have to know what we're feeling. A sense of common humanity. It's not just me. This is a part of life. People make mistakes. This is a kind of inevitable part of life. And then kindness, so that we're not just dumping on ourselves. And what's interesting is that it seems that that is the most effective, efficient way to get something done, to make progress, to perform better. That scientists tell me, studies seem to indicate, possibly, that a harsh, punitive, fearful environment will spike your performance briefly, and then you crash. And that many studies show this, whereas an environment of self-compassion may well be the more sustainable way to make progress over the long haul.
So this idea that we will become frightened or hyper-vigilant on things in the environment to keep ourselves safe, that's sort of like ego spiking, saying, protect yourself, protect yourself. And in a way, we can come to know that that's going to exist and even make friends with that, as Pema Chodron might say. How do we befriend ourselves and become more gentle and self-accepting? And I think this is really instructive in psychotherapy because our clients come to us in a state of suffering. And this, I think, is how we can help them understand that we're all in the same boat, and that this is a way to work with your own arising emotions.
When I look at you, I keep thinking about us being on the Katie Couric show together, which we were, because of Donna. And we did a segment on the Katie Couric show, and the most impactful moment for me was after we were sitting in the studio audience. We did our thing, and then we were seated in the front row of the studio audience, and up on the stage were these two guys who do one of the now many Mindfulness in Schools programs from Oakland, California. Sitting next to me was a little boy, like 8 years old, and then his mom sitting next to him. So Katie Couric on the stage turns to the mother and says something like, "What did mindfulness do for your son?" And she said, he was really in a bad way.
His older brother?
His older brother had been killed. He was devastated. He couldn't function in school. He was so upset. And then he did this mindfulness program, and it really turned things around. And that morning, he'd gotten some big school award. They told him, when he landed. And so then the camera turns to the little boy who's sitting right next to me. I should also add that we had been made up 4 times. I had 4 inches of makeup on, like that. So Katie Couric says to the little boy, "What did mindfulness do for you?" And he basically said, I just reread it, I read the transcript. He said something like, "It helped me sit with my anger instead of acting on it." He said, "It helped me deal with my grief. It helped me have fun again." And I started crying. And so I thought, there's black tracks coming all the way down my face from all this makeup, and he's right next to me. I wonder if that's on the camera. But it was an amazing moment, because that's actually what it does. And he's 8 years old in this, really traumatic situation.
That's why I think it's so promising for us as psychotherapists, because all of our clients are that 8-year-old little boy. And if we can introduce this to them and let them understand how to have compassion for themselves, for life itself, that these things happen, it creates more space somehow within our awareness, our experience, our consciousness. Oh, Sylvia Borstein, one of your colleagues, told this story that so moved me forever. And she told the story that she was always very highly anxious, and she found out when she was on retreat that her father, they called her, had a terminal illness. And she said before in life, she would have fallen through the floor. She wouldn't have been able to cope. And after she got this devastating news, she went into the lunchroom and she had a cup of tea. And for her, this was mind-blowing. I can't believe it. I can actually have a cup of tea. So I think that's the way that it creates space, that yes, life can have all these hardships in it. Yes, there is suffering, and yet.
Yeah.
And I'm just so filled with excitement that mindfulness is growing within our field, because we can share this with our clients. And rather than telling them what they should do or shouldn't do, we can introduce this to them as an opportunity, as an option. So how does being in the present moment help these clients, would you say?
Well, it's interesting when you say that, because that, again, I would almost turn more to you or, to many people in the room. A lot of my work is with caregivers, with first responders, with
us.
People who are getting burnt out, dealing with suffering, people who are, in effect, on the front lines of suffering. So that's what I thought you were going to talk about, and I guess we're going to talk about it tomorrow some, right? And
so do come tomorrow, 8 a.m. It's early, but it's
after you've meditated.
For 2 hours.
So that is something I think that's very important to also consider, is how mindfulness might help the clinician or the person who really is dealing, I guess hour after hour, day after day, with some really difficult material that others are presenting. I think it's pretty clear that mindfulness is a tool, and like many tools, it's great that it can be available. And one of the things about mindfulness that I've always appreciated is that it's so independent. It's independent of a belief system. It's independent of equipment. And it's an experiment. If you practice, let's say, every day for 10 minutes, and you're then at work, and, it's a crazy situation, and there's a lot of pressure, and a lot of, maybe you work with others, and there's an argument going on, and anger's filling the air, and you're getting really anxious. You don't have to open up a closet door and pull out all this equipment and sit down cross-legged and look weird.
Or take a pill.
Or take a pill. You can be breathing. And it's just right there. It's like a resource that is available. It's perfectly private. Nobody has to know you're doing it. And it's there for you. So I see it as like capacity building, or, it's resource training.
And not to be crude or anything, but all the, people who say they don't have time to meditate, you say as long as you're breathing, you can meditate.
Yeah.
And I say, doesn't everybody go to the bathroom? I mean, there's time all day long to just sit and be with our breath. So without further ado, I thought maybe you might lead us in a
Sure.
mindfulness practice today.
So I'm going to bring you back to India, to my first retreat, to that fundamental practice. One of the keys of meditation practice all along is balance. We're cultivating energy and interest and awareness, and also calm and tranquility and relaxation, so it's both. And it said some of that's reflected right away in our posture. So you want some energy in your body, see if you can sit up straight, but not like being really stiff and uptight and hypervigilant. You also want to be relaxed and at ease, but not like so relaxed that your waist slumped over. So feel your way into what feels like a balanced posture for you. And you can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. Sometimes we start just by listening to sound, whether it's the sound of my voice or other sounds. Just let the sounds wash through you. Bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. Bring your attention to your hands. See if you can make the shift from the more conceptual level to the world of direct sensation. Picking up pulsing, throbbing, pressure, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. And then bring your attention to the feeling of your breath. This is just the normal, natural breath. Wherever you feel it most distinctly, the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. Find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel the actual sensations of just one breath. Again, you don't need to name the sensations, but this is where we rest our attention. And if something comes up that's strong enough to pull you away, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, don't worry about it. We say the most important moment in the whole process is the next moment. Can you practice letting go gently and coming back to the feeling of the breath without judgment? And if you have to let go and come back 70 billion times in the next 2 minutes, that's okay. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes.
So I don't have a mic, but maybe we could take 2 or 3 questions if you'd like to stand up and just project it. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You've spoken a little bit about self-compassion. I wonder if you have any comments about compassion for others. That's another radical idea about self-interest and others' interest aligning. It's therapeutic potential.
Okay, so the therapeutic potential of compassion for others. I mean, I think it's enormous. One of the things we encounter, I think, very much is an idea that compassion makes you weak and it makes you give in and kind of succumb to the needs of another, and that if I'm developing compassion, I won't have any kind of, fierceness or boundaries or ability to take a stand. And of course, we don't believe that's true, but we come up against that idea again and again. And so I think it really takes a very personal experience of what it means to have compassion for someone as well as for yourself, and how we don't get weakened by that. And also, it's a kind of balancing act. I mean, there's interesting research now on the difference between empathy and compassion. As an example, empathy being that, obviously, you know this already, the kind of resonance with, let's say, someone is struggling and you can feel into that. But the way empathy might lead instead of to compassion, it might lead to personal distress. We over-identify with the person who's suffering. We get overwhelmed. We feel devastated. And in that devastation, we no longer have the wherewithal, or we don't access the wherewithal to go forward to see if we can be of help, which is an essential part of compassion. So compassion training, to be able to feel that empathy and respond with compassion instead of devastation, is considered a particular kind of training. And it's very important. We hold such unrelenting standards sometimes for ourselves and for others, and it's so easy to overlook the fragility of life and the poignancy of change, and really to see how hard it is and how all those terrible acts really are coming from a place of suffering, and that we can have compassion without being lost ourselves, either without losing our standards, our principles, and also without getting lost in someone else's suffering. So it's an entire field of exploration, and I think it's tremendous.
One more question at the back.
This for a while, but I find that where they're seeing is that this concept of this idea of self-acceptance, that I find that certainly in psychotherapy, many branches of psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral, to humanistic, to psychodynamic, they're all focusing these days recently on capacity for self-acceptance. That's really the kind of the method and the goal. And I find it meditation. When I first started to meditate, I thought that if I just focus on my breath, with discipline, I wouldn't suffer, as you were saying. But I found actually that if I just accept, my mind gets quiet without any effort. And so I just wanted to share that.
That's great, thank you. Did you all hear that? So the question really, I mean, there are lots of ways of meditating, and there also is a lot of our personal habits, then issues that we bring into meditation, like we bring it everywhere else. And so there are ways of meditating that are kind of a little more militaristic, and there are other ways that are more about accepting things as they are. So I would concur with you. I'd vote for the latter.
So there's a lot of new research now on gratitude, working with depression and other issues, and keeping gratitude journals helps us to even out that balance between what's good for me, what's bad for me, to feel grateful and to heighten that awareness. So in that context, I want to just say how grateful I am, and I'm sure everyone in the room is, for your being here today and enlightening us on mindfulness and its role in psychotherapy. So thank you, Sharon Salzberg.
Thank you.